and very welcome. We are so happy to see that so many of you have decided to join our event today. My name is Sara and I work for MATCHi. And for the past decade, we've been enabling the global racket sports community. And we want people to play more through user-friendly tech. And during these years, we've come to learn a thing or two about the industry, and this is some learnings that we want to share with you guys today. Together, we will deep dive into the exciting, fast-paced, and ever-changing racket sports community, mainly focusing on one of its emerging sports, Padel. A sport that's captured the hearts and minds of people all across the globe. And now things are starting to take off in the UK, a country with a rich tennis history. To give a complete perspective, we will walk you through our recently released Padel report, an in-depth assessment of the European Padel landscape, naturally with a focus on the UK market. And to make things even more clearer, we have invited knowledgeable experts and market professionals to join us today. And here in the studio, I have Helena. She is Chief Commercial Officer at MATCHi. We have Viktor, Swedish national team player. And you are very involved in the Padel operations in Gothenburg, Sweden. And also Adam, account manager for the UK. We will also have other exciting guests joining us digitally throughout the event. But let's jump right into it. So Helena, first things first. Why do you think Padel has become such a popular sport, gaining new players every day?
Well, to start with, Padel is a very social sport, and it's easy for everyone to join, whether you're like young or old, if you're super fit or if you are a couch potato. It's easy to join, and even if you never held a racket, it's easy to learn as well. So that's one thing, and we can also see that from the report, from the comments from Jonas Björkman, former tennis player, and also from Paquito, Padel player, saying that it's a very social sport and easy to access. So they're confirming the same thing. And in the Nordics, I think that we had a lot of land and warehouses available, combined with a friendly business climate, which makes it a good climate for a rapid growth, basically. And we're talking a lot about the Nordics, but let's not forget Spain, which actually has 6 million active players from 25 million in total. So they stand for 24% of the total amount of players in the world. So that's quite amazing.
Yeah, and talking about that, how is the growth looking across Europe when it comes to players and venues?
Well, we see a steep curve from both players and courts throughout Europe, represented by, of course, a lot of indoor courts in the colder climate in the Nordics, and a more outdoor-friendly climate in Spain and France. And actually looking at the Nordics, we've increased 500% since 2019, so the last 3 years, extreme growth. And we also see that a lot of Padel operators and investors from the Nordic, they want to copy their success and take it to new markets, such as UK, for example. Looking at the report again, we can see that Paquito saying when Padel enters the market, it's there to stay. And he thinks that in 5 years, the Padel will be 10 times the size that it is now. We can also see that, or we see the statement from Peter Gordon, CEO at Game for Padel, saying that they're aiming for 200 courts by the end of 2023. So UK is coming too. Another example is Emmanuel Macron, the French president, saying that when they're building new sports facilities in France now, they will include Padel from the start, which will, of course, do a lot for the sport in that country. So I think we're only at the beginning, and we're seeing the start now for something that will be huge.
Thank you. And now to someone who entered the Padel scene at an early stage. Viktor, welcome.
Thank you.
What do you remember were some of the early obstacles for Padel going back to when you started playing?
Well, I would say, like for any new sport, it's in the beginning it's a little tricky to reach out to the population, and I'm originally from the tennis community, like many of us players today, which is I would say maybe a little bit conservative business, and we've seen some racket sports in the past years that haven't been so successful in Sweden, speedminton or pickleball or beach tennis. So I would say in the beginning we were a little bit, is this some kind of mini tennis, or
is it even like a professional sport?
Yeah, and it's for the bad tennis players or whatever. But after some hours, we realized this is a real sport, and we got to watch YouTube to see the professionals play, and we also got to see all these different strategies, tactics. That the sport is so much more than just hitting the ball over the net. Also, with the sport being a couple, that you're two on the same side, was interesting. So yeah, and another obstacle I would say in the beginning, it was a big investment to start up a padel center. Of course, where you need a pretty big area, you need a roof at 7 or 8 meters. So it was maybe a little risky in the beginning before the sport really got popular, and to be honest, it took some years before it really exploded. And we had here in Gothenburg, I think we had one or two centers for a while, and people got to try it a bit, and then of course during the pandemic, that was a key for the sport, because just before the pandemic it started, and then during the pandemic it was it got crazy.
Yeah. So speaking of which, like you said, the popularity increased really fast in Sweden, and you were talking about the pandemic. But are there any other mainly reasons you say why the padel increased so fast in Sweden?
Yeah, I would say, in my point of view, everyone is better than they expect. If you think you're gonna be super good, you're a little bit better than super good. Mm-hmm. And if you don't think you're gonna make one shot, you still make some shots, and you somehow you become proud of yourself, and also the things, you have a quick curve of improvement in a very early stage, and the things you don't manage to do the first hour, then you make some of them in the second hour, and you get to feel happy, and also as we said, the social part that you talked about. Of course, it's also a mix of doing a sport while hanging out with friends. So it became a way of seeing your friends, instead of maybe just to meet up for a coffee or a beer with your friends. You started to play padel and then hang out. So I really believe that people had room for a new hobby in their lives, and padel became the perfect match.
So it was a good timing as well, of course.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your experiences. And now over to Vincent, co-founder and growth and participation director of Game for Padel. So welcome, Vincent.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks for joining. Having here what Viktor just said, what takeaways, positive or negatives, have you come across within launching padel as a new sport within the UK?
Yeah, I think it's very much what Viktor said. A lot of people like the fact that padel is easy to play, and it's a social game, and we present it very much as a game rather than a sport, which is why we came up with the name Game for Padel. I think the British people love playing games, and padel is no exemption to that. It's a game, and on top of that, it's a sport as well, because you're sweating, you're burning calories. So I think that's the key aspect of padel. It's a game, it's sociable, it's fun, And as Viktor said, some people may think, it's too easy. It's easier than tennis. It's not for me. Well, play 1, 2, 3 hours, and you will very quickly understand it's not tennis at all. It's very different. It's a complete different game, and it's a lot of fun. So I think it's two different ideas from different people. The UK is a very traditional country when it comes to tennis. So we need to break that barrier between Padel and tennis. Padel is not tennis. They're both very different games. They're both very fun, but we're really trying to push Padel as a game rather than a sport at the moment.
So is there anything you felt has worked well or not well when attracting new people to the sport?
Yeah, well, I always say Padel is an easy sell. The hardest part is to make people come to the court. But once they're playing Padel after 20, 30 minutes, it's a really easy sell. They will come back. So opening weekends, free Padel with a coach, that's worked really well for us. And we were trying to do that a lot when we open venues, when we just have 2 or 3 open days a year, and the courts are really busy. So that's worked really well. On what hasn't worked very well, it's an interesting question. It's I'll probably have to choose. We've tried to launch this similar thing to cardio tennis. We've tried to do cardio Padel with a different name, and surprisingly, it didn't really work well at all. And my thinking is because, again, people see Padel as a game, and playing the game is enough for them to get the exercise. So they don't really need, the music and the fast drills to get fun and get moving. They just need to play the game. So that was interesting to find out from a tennis background moving to Padel.
And Vincent, you mentioned a little bit about the coaching aspect there in the middle. I know you guys work heavily with developing coaches. Can you tell us a little bit more how the coaches come into play when it comes to introducing the sport to new players?
I mean, they're absolutely crucial. Just even by being there, being at the club, we're at a stage in the UK where people don't know the game, so they need to know about the rules. They need to know about the equipment. They need to know, everything. So it's not really teaching them how to be better at the moment. It's teaching them the game. So our coaches, they need to have a certain knowledge. They don't need to be the best coaches in the world, but they need to be very engaging, a lot of energy. They need to be running a quality coaching program for all levels. But at the moment, we're really targeting people who don't know the game, people who've never played racket sport. So a coach for us is crucial to make a club work.
And Viktor, you being in almost the same position as Vincent here, what do you think is important to run a successful Padel business?
Well, I would say the answer on that question has changed over the past years. In the beginning, it was too few centers in Sweden, and as long as you had Padel courts, that was enough for running your business, because there was so many people who wanted to play, much more players than courts. But then over the last maybe 1 or 2 years, it has been built a lot of centers here, and now I believe it's important for every center to find its own niche or profile. So that every center cannot attract every people. So, for example, if the center is in a neighborhood around a lot of schools, you should attract the children, and so that some centers might be a little bit cheaper to play, where you just pay and play, and some centers which have nice social areas, maybe a restaurant, might be a little bit more expensive, but then you get more out of it. So I think it's really important in order to attract every player that every center cannot be the same. That there is a center for everyone, for the families, for the for a group of friends, or the seniors. That I believe is really important.
And Adam, you've been an old tennis player as well, spending a lot of time on both sides of the courts. If you've looked at the best performing venues, what can you say what they've done different to others?
I would say that what Viktor mentioned about the social areas are very important. I've played padel now for 3 or 4 years here in Gothenburg, and in the beginning the focus might have not been on that aspect too much, but that has changed a lot, and today it feels sometimes almost like you're walking into a hotel lobby. It's very, very nicely structured and built, so it's not only about the courts anymore. And then I think just the atmosphere is just a little bit different in padel venues. I think that it's a little bit more sort of day-to-day operations. You're maybe not planning ahead too much. There's a lot of last-minute reservation. There's a lot of last-minute activities going on, where tennis might be a little bit different, because there it's more structured into seasons or semesters, and you might not be able to join something tomorrow. It might already be too late. And in padel, I think it really opened up the opportunity for people to be a little more flexible from day to day.
And Vincent, to quote your Game for Padel colleague Peter Gordon from our Padel report, he's saying we could easily have a few thousand padel courts in the UK in 5 years. What would you say needs to be in place for this to happen?
A lot need to be in place. I completely agree with Peter. We can achieve that in 5 to 7 years. Of the LTA's projection is 400 courts by the end of next year, which I think will be achieved. Game for Padel's target is to build 200 courts over 5 to 7 years, and we have other competitors who have other targets. So we will get there. The current challenges are probably, planning applications are a bit slow. Warehouses, there's not many warehouses as what you would have maybe in Sweden. So what needs to be in place? We need to increase the visibility of the game, using ambassadors such as Zidane in France, such as Ibrahimovic in Sweden. We're lucky to have Andy Murray as an investor and ambassador for Game for Padel. We have Norton, who you spoke to earlier as well, who's one of our ambassadors. So there's a lot of superstars out there who play padel and they keep it quiet. So we need to make sure that they tell everybody that they play padel, and this is how the game is going to be more visible. So that's one aspect, and the other aspect is private club operators such as us and others in Europe who are here with the funding, the help to build, design the courts, and then operate the venues. We need to make sure that we are accessible to people and that people know that we're here to help from day one. So that's two key aspects of making this target possible. But again, I have no doubt this will happen very soon just because of what padel is.
Adam will now show us a business case for padel to give you a better understanding of the commercial aspects of the sport.
Yes, and what you can see on this slide is one of the early establishments that opened up in Sweden already in 2013. And in the beginning, of course, it was a new sport, so it had to be introduced to many new players. And as we can see, the graph has slowly increased over the years as this establishment has also opened up new venues and become almost like a grouping of venues or a chain. And in the beginning, they didn't really have too many employees. It was very entrepreneurial driven by the owners as they were working at the centers, introducing players, having coaching sessions, etc. And when they started opening up more venues, they also started hiring some qualified coaches and people to receive players who come in and work in the reception. But overall, we can see that the data is clearly showing a profitable business. And I think that's really what we want to get out of this slide. Important to mention is also that a lot of things that are happening in a paddle venue can be automated if venues want to. And that's where we at MATCHi come into place a little bit too, with automatic entrance solutions, light solutions, rental cabinets and stuff like that as well.
Thank you. And we also want to say thank you, Vincent, for participating and for your valuable insight about the UK market.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and good luck, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Talk soon.
And the idea behind MATCHi was born through tennis and a willingness to make the sports even more available. A matter of fact, since the foundation, MATCHi have been proud partners with the Swedish Tennis Federation. And just like Sweden, the UK had always have a rich tennis history, with strong ambassadors supporting its popularity. So what synergies are there between tennis and padel, and what can the two sports learn from each other? We have invited Sjöö, Secretary General for the Swedish Tennis Federation, to discuss this subject. So welcome, Christer.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, of course. Thanks for coming. So what would you say is the current state of Swedish tennis? How's the sport evolving?
I think racket sports in general are actually growing in Sweden at the moment. We can see that with paddle, we can see it with tennis, we can see it with table tennis, for examples. For tennis, we're growing a lot in participation. We have a new record for the past 25 years in members in Sweden, and it's growing. We can see that kids tennis is pretty stable, and we're growing a lot in the adult tennis at the moment.
And we know that you've got an exciting project coming up called Game Change 2030. Can you please tell us a little bit more about that and also about the future of Swedish tennis?
Yes, we have a strong tradition in Sweden. We're a traditional sport, one of the biggest individual sports in Sweden. But of course, we have to look into the future, and we played a pretty successful first game, and now we're going to play the next game. And we built a plan together with our club leaders and coaches, and we collected over 350 ideas about what we're going to do. And we have done a package with 12 goals that we're now working on. And if you summarize it, it's getting more players and get better players. That's our target for the future.
And how would you say that tech is enabling the world of racket sports to get people to play even more?
It's really important for us as a federation. It's really important to collect the data to know the players or our members better, know how they want to play and where their expectations are. But I would also say that access and flexibility is kind of the key words, I think, to use the course better and to get more flexible, both how you practice and how you compete. I think the tech could really help us there.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think that what we can provide with the platform and tech in general is automation, and as Chris is saying, access and availability to make it really easy to book a court, for instance, and collecting data from that, which will help you optimize your facility or venue. Also around the community part, to really create this social community around the sport, tech can do a lot.
And Christer, since Padel entered the Swedish racket sports community, what positive effects has the sport had on tennis, would you say?
I think the two sports can actually grow together in a very good way. What we see is that many of our tennis centers are also building paddle courts, which create a good economy. They get more money in, and at the moment they invest that in tennis. So for us, it's really good. The second part, as you said, it's a social sport, and it brings more people to the tennis centers, which is also, of course, good for everything. It's getting a good atmosphere. It gain more money in the cafeteria or in the restaurant or in the shop. And it also gives player the ability to walk and play some tennis, and then they play paddle, so they walk and play in both sports. So I think they really benefit from it in a good way from each other.
And sort of carrying on from that, do you think that venues who open now in the future, do you think they should aim to niche on one sport, paddle, tennis, badminton, or do you think venues should look at maybe combining sports and opening them as a multi-sport center? What are your thoughts on that?
I think we can actually bring all the racket sports together. For tennis, for example, we are a few people on a very big area, and of course, to get a good atmosphere and good social environment, you need more people. And for that, I think it's very good to combine the sports. And I can also see that some people want to play tennis. It's very similar to paddle, but it's also a different sport. And I think the same on the paddle side, that many people want to play tennis, play paddle, but they can still be in the same environment. I think it's also can be good for the economy, for the tennis center in the future. So yes.
Yeah, and we can also see that when looking at some statistics in MATCHi, that 28% of all of our tennis venues also have one or more paddle courts installed at that moment.
Mm. And having two former tennis players here today, what can paddle learn from tennis and vice versa, would you say?
Yeah, well, I would say, because, we always often talk about the competition between tennis and paddle, which Krista says, and also I agree on that there is no real competition. There are some examples of good tennis players switching over to paddle, but we also have a lot of examples where, for example, I have a lot of old tennis friends that stopped playing tennis. Now they got back into the racket sports through paddle, and then they meet up the old tennis friends, and then they start playing tennis together again. So it brings a lot to both sports. And as Adam and I, we're competing a lot in the paddle, and there I would say it's a part where tennis can learn from the paddle in the way you attract audience, or how you perform a great event on site, how you highlight the players, etc. Where it's a little bit more rock and roll, maybe to say, than the tennis, which maybe has become a little bit too traditional in order to adapt to the date of today. So I would say there is still I still love tennis, but I play more padel today. But it also makes me play more tennis than I should have done. So, and also now when so many centers, as you said, have both sports in the way you can combine. The way you do leagues in the padel has been extremely popular. Put that into tennis. And the way tennis attracts children, and how they working with coaches, or how you educate coaches, players in that area. Padel it's a young sport with a young federation. So in the structure and organization, Padel has to learn a lot, and their tennis is super strong and has really good ways of working. So. In the best of words, we can collaborate between the sports, and sure. I think we are on a good way of reaching there.
And I was gonna mention the very similar things there, that I think that paddle can learn to be a little bit more structured through what's happening with tennis during the last couple of decades. The Swedish Tennis Federation has done a really good job on this, of course, of creating some kind of structure within the clubs, but also within the federation. Paddle is so new that there's so many moving parts all the time. So I think they can learn a lot from the Tennis Federation when it comes to structuring different things. And I think also individual venues could learn some more about how to structure, children's practices and semester-long sort of training courses and stuff like that, which is something we see start popping up a little bit at centers in Sweden, but it's still very, very new. And to the opposite, I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but for tennis to maybe be a little bit more flexible on their day-to-day or weekly basis, maybe throw in a couple of one-time beginner courses here and there and just attract people who might look to play tennis tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, not for the next season or semester, but in the short term.
And Christy, we all want people to play more tennis, obviously, and paddle. So what would you say how does the Swedish Tennis Federation work with introducing new players to just tennis?
Oh, but it's if you look at when I grew up, tennis was huge. We have all the high performance player that were competing in Roland Garros, for example, that's playing it right now. And it was kind of normal for my parents to put me to the tennis center and start playing tennis. We can still see that, and many of the kids that are coming to us having parents that are being connected with tennis before, but we can't take that for common in the next coming years. So we have to be out and marketing our sports, and when we do that, we also need to have a good product for them to attract to. So we need to do a great job there. In some parts of Sweden, we of course need more courts, especially in the bigger cities. We need more courts. But I also think, as you said before here, I think we should use the tech to get better use of our courts. As a traditional sport, we have like the same person having the same time from year to year. And I think we can, through the tech, kind of become more flexible so that more player can play actually more tennis also. So we have a lot of a job to do that.
With that being said, we want to thank you so much, Christer, for joining us today, and we're looking forward to our continued partnership ahead.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Speaking of tennis, like most padel professionals, our next guest also comes from a tennis background. Tia Norton has represented the Great Britain's women's senior team 5 times, played in 3 European Championships and 1 World Championship. And more recently, Tia was awarded at the LTA Tennis Awards ceremony, and she also joined the MATCHi team of ambassadors. So very welcome to you, Tia.
Thank you very much for having me today.
Our pleasure. So you've become a professional player in a sport that is starting to make a name for itself in the UK, and it's constantly increasing in popularity. So can you please tell us a bit how that journey has been and how come you started playing to begin with?
Yeah, so I started playing padel when I was 12 years old, so 6 years ago now. And like you mentioned previously, I came from a tennis background, so I played tennis for 5 years prior to playing padel. And it was actually one of my old tennis coaches who invited me over to a padel center to try it out. And from there, I trialed for the junior team to go to the Mexico World Championships for Great Britain. And I got selected for the team out of complete surprise, to be honest, because I'd only been playing a few weeks. And then in that championships, I managed to reach the quarterfinals, and going home, I had to make the decision as to whether I wanted to play tennis or I wanted to play padel, because I was switching shots between the 2 sports and it wasn't being very successful in the end. But yeah, I think having chosen padel, I haven't regretted it one bit. It's definitely been the right choice for me. And the journey over the years, I've definitely seen a lot of people transition from tennis to padel like I did. In the beginning, it was obviously very new to the UK. So training and everything was quite difficult. There was limited courts. But over the years, the popularity has increased huge amounts. There's still a long way to go, but it's definitely on the uprise in the UK.
And you've been also very outspoken about your desire to introduce new people to the sport. What do you think is the best way to do that?
I mean, ultimately, the only way to do that is to get courts into the UK, as many as we can, and make people aware of the sport. I know Game for Padel, they're working really, really hard on creating new venues, and the LTA, now that Padel is under the umbrella of the LTA, they're definitely making it more aware to people, and trying to create more opportunities through tournaments, events, coaching courses, everything like that.
And Viktor, you've been in the similar position. Do you remember how players got into the sport in the early stage?
Yeah, well, I agree with a lot of things that Tia says, and it's I would say padel became a perfect second sport for the tennis players that might have ended their careers or started to slow down a little bit in the tennis improvement. Yeah, and as we all know, it's a lot of similarities between the sports, and obviously tennis has been the best other sport to have your roots in order to become a good padel player. So it's very natural, I would say, that if you have a tennis background or even any sport, as long as you've been in some kind of contact with the ball before, you like padel, and you're actually pretty good at it from the start, and that I think is really, really important.
Yep.
And has been a key why so many new players got into the sport.
And in MATCHi's recently released Padel report, former world #1 double tennis player Jonas Björkman stated that in emerging markets there's a need for strong ambassadors to be able to grow and boost the sport. So how do you think that we can achieve that in the UK, creating strong ambassadors for padel?
I think getting more people into the sport, creating ambassadors from new players coming up, is definitely a promising way to get more people aware. Obviously, creating ambassadors, you're going to make people aware of the sport. You're going to get more people playing, and ultimately, that's the goal we want. We want to get more people into the sport, more people competing, making it more popular around the country, like it has grown in many European countries. GB and the UK is definitely on the uprise, and it's definitely going in the right direction.
So Tia, we talked about increasing the amount of courts in the UK, which we think is very important as well to develop the sport. But what do you think about the coaching aspect? How important is it to have good coaches in place in order for the sport to grow in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, getting the courts is only one part of the growth. The coaches is really, really important, as I've seen. At the moment, I'm not able to get the coaching I need in the UK, so that's why I'm training in Barcelona. But as soon as we get the coaches into the UK, the level in players is definitely going to go up. I mean, like you see in Spain, there's so many coaches everywhere. The level is crazy. So yeah, coaches are definitely a huge aspect of increasing the level in the game and getting more people to play as well.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Tia. It's always a very interesting to get a professional player's point of view, and it was a pleasure having you, and good luck on the court.
Thank you very much.
And as you all can hear, we can stand here, talk about tennis and padel all day, but we're not going to do that. We are soon done for this event, but we have been discussed the different perspectives on padel and its evolution. And what do you guys think the future will hold for the sport?
I think my biggest key component or for centers, I mean not my biggest, but for paddle venues, is to focus on the younger generation. I think that a lot of people in me and Viktor's age and the above have tried paddle now, and a lot of people have gotten into it, but there hasn't really been too many opportunities yet for the juniors and for the younger people to maybe join some kind of 6-month training course with a coach and to really learn the game from the beginning until a higher level. So I think really trying to target the younger generation with good coaching and setting up more structures within the facilities, within some kind of academy or something like that. I think that's where venues are looking to become even stronger right now.
Yeah, and I think that we see a lot of happening in the professional area as well. We see on one side a lot of investors making investments in chains and the growth of paddle, which creates a larger amount of people playing actually, which in the end will benefit the sport in general. And of course, we're all hoping for paddle to join the Olympics. And as we said here before, I think this is only the beginning. So it will be an exciting trip ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree. I also think it's important to keep the joy of the sport. Now it's become a lot of business with a lot of huge actors putting a lot of money into the sport, so that we keep playing for fun and also as we spoke about earlier, that we create centers that attracts everyone.
Yeah.
That we might go a little bit like the restaurant business. That you can pick a place depending on who you are, how much time you have, how much money you have, how old you are, and what your needs are for the day. So that everyone that wants to play paddle really can do it. I believe it's very important.
And I think also a final point, of course, is we've talked a lot about the Nordics today. We touched a little bit of Spain, and this is really just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many countries out there who still haven't had one paddle court or one paddle center, and that's something that we're working heavily with on MATCHi. We're trying to introduce this sport to new countries and try to set it up in some kind of structured way. That's been happening in the Nordics here in the last couple of years.
Indeed. Support that growth.
Yep.
Yes. With that being said, I want to thank you for joining us today, and also, of course, all of you out there listening in to our event. And please just give us a call or contact us if you want to know anything more about paddle. Thank you, and see you later.